So, ladies and gentlemen, if you are in the arena, you can see a bit unscheduled, but needs a bit of a test drive. That's the Weald Foundation Jagdpanther coming out to very, very quickly. Many of them had teething trouble, many of them had issues with being slightly underpowered. This one's got the Maybach HL230T engine in the back of it. Very small engine, if you have the chance to have a look at one ever, for the size of the vehicle. Physically small, very compact features for engineering. And of course, one of the other issues that we always like pointing out, a lot of the crews of these vehicles in World War II had very little training time, and it was one of the other problems of trying to maintain these vehicles. Unless they're driven with a certain different armoured vehicles, were ending up being messed up, is the only way of describing it, by their own crews, because they were not trained well enough to be able to drive it properly. Now, of course, we've had the chance, we've had decades of looking at and studying German vehicles, German armour, but the guy who's driving that probably hasn't had an awful amount of time to get it absolutely right. And one of the things that's often described, what was called track mileage, we call it here at the Tank Museum, and the military call the same thing. How far can you seriously drive a track vehicle before a major failure? And of course, where we're looking at 75-year-old vehicles, from the outside, a lot of that Jagdpanther looks very big, very good, nice strong metal, but inside, once you've got metal that may have metal fatigue, you've got seals, you've got bushes, you've got all sorts of connecting rods, and again, over time, one of those is bound to fail at some point. So once again, that's the whole point of doing things like test drives like this. It's just seeing, are we actually getting slightly sticky brakes? You can see here, is that corner a little bit tight to be able to turn? And again, with a modern running of these vehicles, often the crews, I often say it here for our events, we always say to our crews, if the temperature gauge is going up too much, if you're getting a little bit worried about a noise you haven't heard before, we would much rather the driver and commander says stop the vehicle and find out what's going on, rather than finding ourselves with a major catastrophic failure, because of course very few spares available for these vehicles, and if you're going to have to remanufacture some of these things, smaller items, you know, it's going to be expensive enough, but you imagine the cost of something like engineering a whole gearbox. And if you want to see what a Jagdpanther gearbox looks like, there's actually a section one inside the Tank Museum next to the Panther, and the complexity of that gearbox is quite astounding. And to think that was being made under wartime conditions, the manufacturing processes. So, you know, these are very, very complex bits of technology in their day, and they're still very delicate, complex bits of technology now in 2019. Now, I mentioned this particular Jagdpanther, it ended up coming off a range, Superbright Ranges, many years ago, has gone through a lengthy restoration process by the STKFZ Foundation, now the Weald Foundation, and there's a number of very interesting German vehicles and other countries' vehicles now they're restoring. Jagdpanther, for those of you probably know all this, it's one of those vehicles the Germans, and certainly Hitler, loved the idea of hunting tanks, so in other words putting a more... Now what's going on there with this Jagdpanther? At the moment I think they're just checking if they're cooling off the steering brakes and just making sure that it's going to run successfully and it can turn corners. One of the problems, of course, is if you are using your steering, you're pulling a lever back, and what happens when you pull that lever back is it's binding on the brakes to help it actually turn. So you're slowing the track on one side, and of course, what often happens is those brakes then start getting quite hot and sticky, which is another point.
do go over, have a closer look at it when it's parked up, and have a word with some of the crew there that have come along and have helped do the restoration on that very stunning piece there of German armour. Now inside the museum, just out of interest, we have a Jagdpanther. It was actually made just after World War II. A number of 9 Panthers, 12 Jagdpanthers were put together in the factory under the supervision of REME, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, when Germany had fallen, and they were used for testing.